Is Riverside affiliated with Riverside Church, or it's just the name of the
No,
platform?
I don't believe so. No, it's just the name of the platform.
Okay.
Sir, thank you. This is I call this whole umbrella here the Brolic Studios, where I have Brolic Podcast, Pilled Podcast, and now a special exclusive. So thank you all, everybody, FBI Jim, Russian bot, who are watching on Twitch. Thank you, and hopefully some real people too. We have an exclusive here with my friend Alvaro Franco, also director, and my colleague from hopefully a film to be made in the near future. Uh, but that can be another talk. Right now, uh, I wanted to discuss your recent trip to Cuba with under Code Pink and your experiences there. So first, welcome, my friend.
Thank you for having me, and nice to be involved with something in the Brolic Studio label.
Yes,
And I'm
Brolic
wearing my
Universe.
special shirt for the occasion.
Ah, Che. Yes. I don't. I regret. I have not. I need to watch the. Did you see the Motorcycle Diaries? The one with Gal Garcia Bernal.
I didn't, but if you give me 5 seconds, I can show you the movie about Chez's life that I did watch, and
Okay.
sort
Oh,
of
okay.
mentioned sort
Yeah,
of
I missed one
mentioned
of them.
in Foster's Professor Foster's class. But
Yes. No, I haven't either. Okay. So that's.
actually, that's a crappy.
Is
There it
that a
is.
documentary though?
No, this is the one with Benicio del Toro.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
All right.
reversed,
So I.
unfortunately, but you could see Steven Soderbergh's director approved signature.
Oh, wow. Okay. Nice. All right. So I need to check that one out. Well, so first, thank you for during this time in our history, being someone who really put his life and time, you know, on the line to go to visit Cuba during this time of, um, you know, austerity, a time where we are pulling resources and the people are suffering, and that you actually went there. And we can talk a lot about it, but not everyone actually went there. So first, I want to thank you for actually doing the work to go there and see what things are like on the ground. So when did you get back?
I got back last Monday, the 23rd of March. Yeah.
Okay, and you were there for how long?
I was there with Code Pink from the 20th until the 23rd. Yeah.
Okay, so when you left, what with code first? What was your understanding with what you and the delegation with Code Pink was trying to do? And then also, what were some things that you individually wanted to do while you were there and make up the trip?
My understanding was that my understanding was that Code Pink, along with Progressive International, was organizing this
Mhm.
delegation to participate in a humanitarian mission to deliver aid and medical supplies. But Code Pink specifically had a Google form on their website, where anyone who wanted to travel with them was welcome to apply, and they would select. I'm assuming based on the answers or the needs that they had, who would get
Mhm.
to join them. And if you were selected, then you were responsible for covering your own airfare to Miami, and then Code Pink would handle the rest logistically.
Okay.
And then individually, I had always wanted to visit the island, but I never.
Hmm.
Excuse me. Um, the stars were never in alignment because of economic reasons or um,
Hmm.
scheduling time off of work, for example. But
Hmm.
since being laid off in December, I suddenly found myself with more free time, and I had a little bit of money saved up, and like it was a now or never situation where if
Right.
I wanted to visit and make a difference in this existential moment of
Hmm.
the Cuban government's existence
Hmm.
with the blockade on top of the almost 70-year embargo. Um, it was either now or never. So I just found myself pulling the trigger. Um, the timing
Hmm.
is never, timing is never ideal, but it was kind of like the island calling to me, and it was for a good reason,
Hmm.
and it wasn't. It was just over the weekend, and it was an opportunity to film and potentially make some use of the footage, whatever footage I filmed there. And Code Pink,
Right.
you know, only kept me. I only waited a few days, or maybe 10 days at most, to hear back from them. And to my pleasant surprise, they said congratulations. They sent me an email with more details, and then
Oh,
I
great.
was on my way. I was mentally on my way to join them and then see what I would
Hmm.
find on the ground. But I had always, like for personal
Yeah.
reasons, like
Well.
I also wanted to bring my mother there while she was still alive, and it would have been great
Hmm.
to like
Hmm.
get her treated by some of the world-renowned healthcare from the Cuban doctors. But I told myself that I
Hmm.
would just bring her with me spiritually, and I think that
Spiritually. Hmm.
she probably would have been more emotionally impacted than I was. I mean, I was too,
Hmm.
but she was always a very sensitive woman, and none of it like none of the surroundings there would have seemed alien to her. And I think because it would have reminded
Hmm.
her of her own upbringing back in Ecuador, she probably would have
Hmm.
been crying in public based on how moving the resilience of the Cuban people was. So
Hmm.
yeah, just wanted to include that.
Beautiful.
Didn't mean to cut you off.
Of course. Of course. No, that's a very beautiful thought. Um, so I want you to kind of like put together what your understanding um, and beliefs are of the circumstances historically, contextually, that Cuba finds itself in now. I know that you can go all the way back to large portions of our embargo and our sanctions, but right now, what are the Cuban people facing that is a specific threat to the moment that, and then just briefly in context to what we're used to knowing as the kind of relationship between the US and Cuba. Why is this turning into something that's really an imminent threat to the people?
Well, first of all, I apologize if you hear any background noise. It seems like anytime I
Mhm.
I do one of these interviews or I report back,
Mhm.
the angry neighborhood drivers tend to honk their horns, and the double parking seems to skyrocket. So
Okay, it
I
just
apologize to
adds
the
up.
audience if they hear any
Mhm.
interference from the background.
Mhm.
But to answer your question, I guess in a general sense, Cuba has always been under siege since the first year or the first moment of the revolution,
Mhm.
specifically with the trade embargo that the United States enforced under President John F. Kennedy, and
Mhm.
then despite that trade embargo, Cuba always accepted and presented scholarships to international students who wanted to study medicine and take
Mhm.
those healthcare practices back to their own countries, including Palestinian
Mhm.
medical students. And
Mhm.
they so far extended their resources to help the African liberation struggles in the 60s and beyond, most notably with Che Guevara going to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and later on Cuban soldiers in Angola. And then during the 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba went through an especially hard time called the Special Period. And then during the second term of Barack Obama's administration, he opened up democratic. He was a Democrat, but diplomatic relations to an
No,
extent.
I understand what you mean. Hmm.
Yeah, to
Hmm.
allow, if I'm not mistaken, tourism as a category for
Hmm.
Americans to visit the island, as well as people who had relatives directly and could fly out from
Hmm.
Miami to visit them.
Hmm.
All of which was rescinded under Trump, obviously, and
Hmm.
now he's made it so that you can't even bring back cigar. Anything classified as anything as innocuous as rum or cigars, those famous cigars, are classified as illegal
Hmm.
contraband that can be confiscated and will be
Hmm.
confiscated by TSA or Customs and Border Patrol if they find it on your in your
Hmm.
luggage. But
Okay.
all of which is to say that um, last month, when or earlier this year, when the Trump administration decided to increase the sanctions by placing an oil blockade on against the Cuban government,
Hmm.
created a desperate situation where there were fuel shortages and rolling blackouts across the country,
Hmm.
and most it most how could it most affected the medical sector, the healthcare sector, and all aspects of everyday life for Cubans. That either resulted in garbage not being collected and as a result being piled up in certain areas, as well as ventilators malfunctioning for the most vulnerable patients in the medical system, and then in some cases requiring hospital doctors and hospital staff to hand pump them for a few minutes, so that the most vulnerable people, as well as babies, wouldn't die in that short time span before the emergency power or the main source of power kicked back in. As well as people not being able to go to school or work by bus or public transit as they used to do. So people either walk to work, or they had to rely on some form of carpooling. um, and that's just to give like an overall impression of how it's negatively
Yeah.
impacted um, aspects of everyday life on the island. If you talk to
Hmm.
different Cubans, they could tell you how it's affected the food, for example, right? So on top of the food shortage already in place,
Hmm.
a lot of food tends to spoil because the electricity gets cut off and the refrigeration doesn't work. You're dealing with already with food scarcity, and on top of that, whatever little food certain households possess already going to waste because of the electricity just randomly disappearing. And I saw it firsthand when I was attending a ballet performance. I think I forgot what the specific name for it is called. I think it's um, not ballet, not folkloric ballet, but
Hmm.
it was ballet mixed or fused with flamenco,
Hmm.
um, and it was at a specific theater where the Liszt Alfonso Dance Company performed, and I thoroughly enjoyed the performance. But tragically, it was cut halfway short, like halfway through, right after the intermission. All the lights went out, and the audience had to use
Mm.
their phones as flashlights to illuminate the stage. And then the director of the
Wow.
theater had to come out and personally, she wanted to personally apologize the fact that it was a sold out show and people had paid their tickets to go see it, but that they couldn't continue with the rest of the show because of the blackout. But everyone,
Hmm.
regardless, stood up and gave them a standing ovation, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
gave these chants of Cuba sí,
Hmm.
bloqueo no, and Viva Cuba, especially. And that was one of the two
Hmm.
highlights of my time there as a visitor. And I'm sure those. I want to give credit to those who actually
Mhm.
went to hospitals and interacted with school children. You know, one of the things that we didn't have over there was Wi-Fi, which we didn't anticipate. So I wasn't able to keep track of where different delegation members were going, and certain things were happening at the same time. But I do want to give credit to those who were in the hospitals and talked to doctors and talked to school children. They probably had a much more direct observation of how the rolling blackouts affected them. And from my perspective, just seeing it, how
Mhm.
it impacted the arts, the fine arts, and that part of Cuban society
Mhm.
was eye opening, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these stories. You hear the stories that are reported on, which is first and foremost why it's so important you all went, so that you can have on the ground knowledge of what's happening and not rely on whatever media, as I like to call it now, legacy media, cares to report on.
Or mainstream
And
media.
of course, Cuba's or mainstream media. But as I think it was Qasim Rashid who I first heard the term legacy media, and I kind of like it because it's like kind of you're just going almost based on a name. It's not even necessarily about the substance. But yeah, mainstream legacy. Although all the sources that the majority of this country turns to, they who knows what stories out of Cuba, if any. Um, and like if it is reported on in a very superficial high level way. So I wanted to know what you found as the day-to-day problems of the Cuban people, and you illustrated that it's as something as simple, if something as simple, like you said, as the arts can be interrupted this way. What about dire needs, right? What about uh, even just and this is something people bought tickets for as a big production. What about day to day life? What about hospitals? People don't think about all the consequences. You just hear an oil blockade and think that's not such a big deal. Well, look at all the ramifications of that. It's not such a simple thing.
Yeah, Venezuela
Um,
used to be the principal supplier of oil. Everything is connected
mhm.
to this
Right.
new, like, or the resurrection of the Monroe Doctrine. Like Venezuela, for
Hmm.
example, used to be the biggest supplier of oil
Hmm.
to
Yeah, explain
all
that. Hmm.
all sectors of Cuban society. But
Hmm.
after the illegal kidnapping and detention of President Nicolas Maduro and first combatant Celia Flores, the interim president Delcy Rodriguez, now against her will and against the will of the Chavistas, almost like with a knife to her throat, as some
Hmm.
comrades like to say,
Hmm.
has had to stop, and found themselves victim of the, like, or victims by extension. Maybe that's a good
Yeah.
way, but victims by extension of the Cuban blockade. And
Hmm.
Venezuelan oil, against the will of the people, is like now being funneled to Israel and other enemies, other entities or countries that the Chavista movement or the Bolivarian revolution considers to be their enemies. So it's all connected, sadly.
Yeah. No, that's an important distinction to make, that this is all part of a greater plan and these moves are connected. Um, but before we get more into what you found when you actually spoke to people there, what do you think are the misconceptions about the people who went to Cuba? Because there's a lot of uh, people on, not just to go even more extreme than the legacy media, of course, the right wing media especially, who are characterizing the trip, the movement, the anyone supporting Cuba at this point. Of course, it's always been linked to the big C word, communism. But right now, what is the some of the clear misconceptions you think, or that you've seen media heard from people about the trip versus what actually it was?
Well, I had the opportunity to have dinner with, on my last night there, with a couple of people, including the president of the National Lawyers Guild and a member of
Hmm.
the the Instagram page Anti Conquista, or Anti Conquista, and
Hmm.
a joke that he made kind of resonated with me because he said that he spent like the whole trip with his mind blown, wide open, and having to unlearn all of the propaganda that even he, as a leftist or as a communist, had to
Mm-hmm.
um, or heard all his life before coming to Cuba for the first time, like me. And um,
Mm-hmm.
the first thought that he had was like, this society has such a strange dictatorship. I haven't seen a single police officer in all of my time here. I don't see any surveillance cameras on the street. I don't see anyone following me. I haven't, I haven't been thrown in jail or for expressing dissent or anything. I haven't seen, newspapers being closed down. And I told him like, yeah, it's incredible. I personally saw children, young children, hanging out outside, doing whatever children do, practicing dance moves or hanging out with their friends, drawing on the
Mm-hmm.
sidewalk with pieces of chalk. And the parents were not around. There weren't any cops around because there was no need to. No crime, as we understand it, was being committed because everyone has
Mm-hmm.
not only does everyone look out for each other, but there there's no sense of predation there, as we are preying on the vulnerable, as we've seen here, and as we understand it. And there's such a free flowing interaction between the children and then the elders in the community, who
Mm-hmm.
have lived there and continue to live there, like the director of the Asada Shakur documentary Eyes of the Rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
She lives in Old Havana, and I had the pleasure of visiting her in her home
Mm-hmm.
along with other
Mm.
delegation members. And it was touching to see, like, halfway through our visit, a couple of small children who were accustomed to visiting her to get candy pay her a visit now to check up on her because of her sore throat. And she had to tell them, "Oh, yeah, it's feeling better today, but just give me a little while. I'm here
That's nice.
entertaining some friends, some visitors."
Mm-hmm.
So that was the biggest, I think, misconception that people still have,
Mm-hmm.
to this day when they criticize, Cuban society and its government on social media, is the
Mm-hmm.
concept of this communist dictatorship that represses people, and doesn't allow, like, human rights abuses, and doesn't allow freedom of the press. uh, I'm telling you, there's no sense of being monitored or surveilled. And I think it was either a Havana resident or a government official that told me secondhand that there's like the only time that people are detained or imprisoned is if they're actively committing violence in public on the street. Otherwise people are free to protest
Mm-hmm.
as much as they want. And there will be, violent incidents, such as the Communist Party office that was, like, set on fire in a different, not in Havana, but in a different province, in
Mm-hmm.
response to the frustration about the blackouts.
Mm-hmm.
But that level, I didn't observe personally that level of frustration or
Mm-hmm.
violence in person. And Cubans, this is something that one of our tour guides told us. He said, if you talk to an everyday Cuban or an average Cuban on the
Mm-hmm.
street, and you engage them about politics or philosophy, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you'll be talking to having a conversation with one Cuban about that is like hearing from seven different Cubans, because everyday Cubans, obviously beneficiaries of free education, are very well read and, to any extent, knowledgeable about international politics. And I think it's safe to assume
Mm-hmm.
that, like, the everyday working class Cuban is not only more literate but more knowledgeable than a lot of everyday working or middle class Americans, unfortunately. Um, and such is the
Yeah,
extent of their
one of the highest
education.
literacy rates in the world, right?
Right, right. Whereas we,
Yeah,
have, I think, at least 50% or at least 60% of people who can't read beyond the sixth grade level, unfortunately.
yeah, yeah. As my Pilled co-host frequently reminds me 54% can't read past the
Yeah,
sixth grade level,
yeah, yeah.
or at a sixth grade
At a
level.
sixth
So,
grade level. Yeah.
um, yeah, but I think, of course, what helps that ideology to persist is the result of any embargo, of any measure that the U.S. has taken, all the way up to the most current measures to cut Cuba off from other sources in other parts of the world. It fills the propaganda. Cuban society is just by nature so behind, right? You
Well, the
know,
potential is
you're
unlimited.
yeah, yeah.
You know, you start once you actually visit the island, you start to realize, wow, imagine how much more, um, as revolutionary as they are, imagine like how much more they could be showing us if they could be allowed to breathe and
Hmm.
not suffer the consequences of daring to imagine a society that's anti-imperialist. You know, and that also kind of moves the heart in a sense, because on top of like everything that they've accomplished under oppressive conditions, just imagine like the potential um, helping humanity even more, or bringing humanity to an even higher level if such drastic measures weren't imposed against them.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of do the same thing domestically here when we look at communities that historically have been neglected, that have populations that have experienced systemic racism, and then you hear people say, "Oh, look at all the crime. Look at all the crime that happens there. That's why they're set back. That's why this and that." And you kind of see the same thing with Cuba. It's like all this stuff, all as much as we can, we've cut off things that could help advance Cuban people, who that could help them reconnect to a global economy and be able to have all the resources that many other Western countries have of receiving, exports, imports, shipping, and do our most to cut those things off. And then we point to them kind of as a result of communism, but never including all the hand we had to play in those things changing their economics. So it's kind of it's an old playbook, really. You kind of your government has a hand in impacting the economic status of a country, but then you pretend like that didn't exist and just look at the government and point to the government without, any of your own culpability. So I think that, do you think some of that, though, after your most recent experience there, do you think some Americans are going to wake up and see that, or have you had some conversations with people here in the US following your trip, and some people actually were learning things about Cuba against, like your colleague that you met there, saying, like, unlearning some of the propaganda that they were taught? Do you think that's going to happen stateside?
I think so. As a matter of fact, there were Cuban Americans who joined the delegation, and they had their
Hmm.
own subgroup, some of which had never been to the island, even though their families from there.
Hmm.
And they've already published their own media on their own channels or through DSA or their own op-eds, showing how similarly they were moved and inspired by
Hmm.
what the Cubans were able to accomplish under these dire circumstances. And I think that's helping to destroy some of the talking points that not only have been part of the Red Scare since the 50s and um, all the way through the 21st century, but more specifically the right wing talking points that have surfaced, ironically, while we were in a sort of Wi-Fi blackout and therefore
Hmm.
couldn't respond to in time. But there were all sorts of accusations about us being champagne socialists and staying in a five-star hotel, and like enjoying, like living off the fat of the land, if that's the right expression while Cubans were
I never,
suffering.
yeah, I never really understood that. It's like, even if that, let's say that was true. Let's say you did stay in a 5-star hotel. Let's just say
Which
it.
which we did, but I'll go into why that was the case. But go ahead.
Yeah, but and so what? I don't understand like how that changes the actual impact of what the Cuban people are facing. You are still, first of all, you could still, you could go to a 5-star hotel somewhere else in the United States. You could have done anything with your time. You're going there. It's not like this is a glamorous trip. You're going there to help people who have these very significant, conditions of limited resources. God forbid you have a good meal. I don't understand. It just, to me, it's like such the most basic, like it's kind of like the pink washing of sometimes when, we're doing something to a country in the Middle East. Also, I'm trying to stop saying Middle East now. I'm disliking kind of its relative, because it's Middle East to the United States, so to Western. So, but anyway, that's what we call it. So, and then we kind of say, but look at what they would do to gay people.
Yeah,
And it's like, yes, I don't want gay people to be hurt anywhere.
yeah,
But what the fuck does that have to do with bombing the shit out of them? It's like, it's still the same type of like, look at that, so you won't pay attention to this. So you
yeah,
won't pay attention. And I hope that the American people, whenever someone does some shit like that, can just say, yeah, I don't want any gay people hurt anywhere. Here, yeah, let people eat who are visiting well, and what? And what does that have to do with the other issue at hand? Don't fall for it. Don't fall for
right.
this little look over here while we do that. Right? But anyway, that's just my annoyance with this argument to start. Yes, go ahead and respond to that.
Well, I mean, let it be known also that Cuba has the most progressive family code in the Western Hemisphere, which they passed, I think, 2 years ago or a few years ago. And in Havana, at least, there is an active LGBTQ population.
Hmm.
Um, and, visibility regardless. I think because of the passing of this historical redefinition of family under
Hmm.
the revolutionary government,
Hmm.
I could say, yeah, they might not be the most highly visible population, but they still have their culture. They still have their drag shows. There was, in fact, a drag show that took place while the delegation was there, and that some members attended.
Hmm.
And there's mutual respect for that. And it may not be like Cubans. Cuban media or society may not have the equivalent of RuPaul's Drag Race, but I think I could just from outside observation they have
Hmm.
much more freedom and safety to live their best lives than a
Then
lot of
Arkansas,
than yeah than any any
then
sort
some
of
states here.
any representation, any illusion of representation at the highest levels here in so-called capitalist democracy. But all of which is to say that um, I think the pink washing wasn't such a thankfully. Well, at
Yeah.
least the right wing critics didn't seize upon that. I think they're too busy
No, I
being
meant as a parallel for you.
oh
The
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing with the 5-star and the shit. Like what? Yeah, you wanted to say there was a reason for that. You can explain if
I
you
will.
want.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
me,
yeah.
it's a such a dumb. It's the dumbest of dumb
It
arguments. But
is.
go. But yeah, why? What would you say to that?
Um, it was so stupid because anyone with like the most basic level of comprehension or the amount of Google research would see that if, according to the U.S. State Department, Americans are forbidden from staying and registering anywhere other than casas. I think they're called casas particulares, which is a form of Airbnb style accommodation, or four hotels in Havana, I think, or like I can't remember if it was just in Havana or the whole country, but let's assume Havana at least. Americans cannot
Okay.
stay in any hotel other than those who are owned by a foreign company, and in this case, it was only 4 hotels in that whole area, and the one that we stayed in was owned by a Spanish company called Iberostar. So if we had stayed any, and what like Airbnb accommodation can host 170 plus people, you know, and if you want to accommodate such a large group, you have to play by the rules essentially. Otherwise, you're going to end up having delegation members, some of whom have not visited Cuba in the past, ended up getting prosecuted over something as trivial as where they're staying um, during their time on the island. And I see that you've disappeared. Let me just turn my camera off until you get back.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Uh,
Sorry about that. That was FBI Jim sliding in our DMs saying, not these motherfuckers destroying the propaganda. Um, but anyway, I'm gonna title just to make sure FBI Jim's in the right place. Uh, I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna title. I realize I didn't title this anything. Uh, I'm gonna say Code Pink delegation. It was Code Pink, and what was the other? What was the other sponsoring group?
Progressive International.
Thank you. All right. So, all right. Well, I'm putting that in. So, yes. So you were saying that four. There's only 4 hotels that one can stay at. They must be foreign owned. This was owned by a Spanish company. It needed to
Yes.
suit to like all the people in the delegation. So of course that's where you went.
Yeah, and I did the liberty. I took the liberty of finding that State Department list that I was telling you about, and I can put it in the chat so that even though we're live, you can take a look at it. But it's called the Prohibited
Hmm.
Accommodations list, and they have lists of like
Yeah.
whole. And I was wrong. It's not just for Havana; it's for the whole country. There's like a whole like hundreds of hotels where no American is allowed to stay. Um, and effectively, that left the delegation with very
But they
few
only give you
choices.
like a handful that you can.
Right. and they have to be
Yeah.
foreign owned. They can't be Cuban owned.
Okay.
And I was saying before, or a few seconds like after you got cut off, that it's unreasonable to ask a casa particular to host 170 plus people. So that left us basically with no choice but to go to what's called a five-star hotel, even though a five
Right.
star is relative anywhere outside of the US. And I'm sure any like American tourist that expects to be pampered would go into one of these hotels and be like, oh, this isn't 5 stars, more like 3 star or whatever. But that's like one of the, just to show you one of the BS obstacles that are put in place by the American government,
Right.
and why it destroys that right wing
And
talking point
God
of like,
forbid you drink.
yeah.
Look
So
at
that
them sipping on rum.
yeah. But the Cuban people honestly were the ones that I talked to anyway were appreciative and had no like issues
Mhm.
with. They probably understood the the State Department's position as well. So they were like, no, no, it's like it's totally. They were very friendly and accommodating and be like, no, please, like you're our
Mhm.
guests, you're our guests. We appreciate this gesture of solidarity that
Mhm.
you're here to give to us and to symbolize. So we want you to
Right.
feel at home.
And that's the other thing I want to kind of discuss. There's a big divide between the Cuban people here in the US and the Cuban people in Cuba, because many of the Cuban people here in the US, especially in Florida, I'll say, I mean, that's where there's the largest community in Florida and Miami, um, vote Republican and lean to the right. Uh, and they are in many ways supportive of President Trump and whatever the fuck he does, including this,
Even though they're
because
getting
they,
deported.
even though some of them are getting deported, uh, because their association with communism, and this is a whole other, this would be a whole other segment about their association with communism under Castro and where that has parallels to today, where there's differences, where there was also propaganda there, but yes, where there could have been, where there was also, God damn it, FBI Jim. All right, are you still there?
I get, yeah, I'm still here. It's just that your signal is kind of blurry. Oh no. Okay.
It's so funny we're talking about like Cuban government and like communism, and like while that happens, this ad comes up on Riverside as I'm trying to reconnect that says, "Need more streaming power? Upgrade."
Well, this is what it was like for me anyway.
Right,
On the
when you
island.
didn't have Wi-Fi or
Yeah.
barely had Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not trying to get into the Ailes issues, non-issues, propagandas and non-propagandas of Castro and all that. That's its own show. But many people who came here from Castro and are in Florida, or but mainly in Florida, but throughout the U.S., are against the Cuban government, no matter what the hell's going on, and side with the U.S. Then you have the Cuban people who are actually there right now. And I think that in the US, it's very important to hear from people like you and the delegation and people that go to Cuba to see what the people are going through now. Because if the Republican Party and even some Democrats can always point to the Cuban people here and say, look, Cubans don't agree with this. It's like, which Cubans? And also, just like I'll say to be fair about the Venezuelan people, it's not a monolith, okay? No one's a monolith. No government is all good. Also, no government is all perfect. But right now, it is not is propaganda. There is a real need, and you went there to actually demonstrate that and speak with the people. So do you see that staunch divide kind of between domestically what Cuban what is seen as the Cuban voice here versus what you there when you visited?
I think that's why it was important to. I think that was one of the main reasons of why it was important for the Cuban Americans for Cuba. Oh, FBI Jim, whatever that means.
Sorry about that. It's all on my end. It's not you. I can look at the stats here. I'm only half as strong as I should be. Um,
Well, I sent you a message on WhatsApp about that if you wanted to maybe change the format, but that's up to you.
well, I think what I would do if no, 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 we can leave. I mean, we can leave it as is for now. I think
Okay.
that what I'll do if it happens again is I'll join. It's also the system. If I join from my iPad, which is actually older, it tends to work. But anyway,
Oh,
let's just try to finish up. So yes, you were saying this is why it was so important to go.
yeah. This is I. I think that's at least symbolically why. Well, not just
Hmm.
symbolically, but as a starting point, why it was
Hmm.
important to see younger Cuban Americans who weren't
Hmm.
um, quite indoctrinated by that Red Scare propaganda
Hmm.
to show up for the island at a critical time and see firsthand for themselves what Cubans had to say about life on the ground and how the revolution, like how in defense of the revolution they were, but not only that, but um, how they felt, how as difficult or however difficult their life was already under the embargo, and was actually made worse by those who claimed to be liberating or trying to liberate Cuba, or allowing it to be less oppressive and more friendly to American interests or businesses, or like to allow the first McDonald's on the island or whatever. So that was like visually, at least, that was a very big counterpoint to the usual Gusano propaganda. Gusano being the term that Fidel used for the Cuban right wing exiles.
Okay, I was gonna ask. All right, and what you actually brought for people who, aside from goodwill and support and you know things that you can't quantify, um, you know, that added to the spirit of Cuban people to say you have support here in the U.S. Did there were resources brought as well, right?
Right. There were, I want to say, I know at least 100,000 tons of aid, but I'm going to say 320,000 tons of medical supplies and other forms of aid that were brought from the U.S. in the same charter flight that we flew in to deliver to hospitals, um, organizations, and directly, in some cases, into the hands of people. Like I saw firsthand when I was in a walking tour in Old Havana, and we stopped by a sort of elder care community where the director in charge had to have medical experience in case of any emergency, as you can imagine, because it was mostly like
Hmm.
80 or 90 year plus residents that were there, and it was like the polar
Right.
opposite of um, what we as Americans see in terms of retirement homes or uh, nursing homes with all of its like cold, sterile, impersonal facilities. But
Yeah.
there were
Yeah.
other opportunities that because things were happening at the same time, that I couldn't see firsthand. But I saw photos and videos of other delegation members that did deliver lots of badly needed supplies to Cuban
Hmm.
doctors, and solar panels and flashlights, and in some cases batteries, um, while the island was hit with two blackouts while we were there.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah. So,
one
go
point I forgot to mention earlier is
ahead.
that apart from the visibility of the Cuban Americans on the
Hmm.
delegation, um, the other component to that, the other reason for why it was significant is to show the Cuban
Hmm.
people that not all Americans, Cuban or otherwise, were in agreement with the
Of
policies
course.
of the Trump administration. So it was like a
Yeah.
goodwill gesture, but also to show, hey, there are a lot more of us than this like
Hmm.
hateful minority that actually want to
Yeah.
see the Cuban people flourish and um, have the freedom to self determination.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's really important. And I just wanted to also highlight, like, you can't argue that, like, people should know, in addition to the intangibles, you brought some tangibles too, that, like, this is needed. There's no debate here whether or not all of you went there to do something of a net benefit. There was a net benefit. It's hard to I don't anything else against that is propaganda.
Yeah.
What I want you to be able to do to close out now is, like, what do you see as the next steps? What do you see as obviously, I'm not asking you in 8 minutes, can you solve this whole damn thing? No, we'll never have enough time for that. But what I am asking is, what do you see as a tangible next step? Do you think we need to continue having a uh, regular delegation such as yours that will go every, I don't know, few weeks, months? Does this need to be a regular thing? Also, is that even going to be sustainable? You even told me some people were being stopped on their way back, which was not a surprise, right? That some people were being stopped and detained on their way back by this administration. So we know that this is some United States citizens going to Cuba and actually making things better and showing any sort of anti-propaganda effort is the last thing that this administration is going to want. So, what are sustainable measures that we can do going forward to help the Cuban people?
Well, one of one of the Cubans that I talked to on the ground while I was there on my own time, like after 8 or 9 o'clock,
Hmm.
let's say, is how
Hmm.
visibly the lack of tourism was affecting them. And one of
Hmm.
the sustainable things that I would recommend people do if they want to help out is, if you can't donate, if you can't bring a significant amount of aid with you, just bring money, because like any visitor to the island is not, especially America. Well, let's say from the American point of view, you are not allowed to use any sort of banking transaction. You cannot use your credit card or your debit card. So just bring money and be generous with your tips,
Yeah.
like I had to be.
Hmm.
Um, support
Hmm.
um, any local restaurants. So don't expect a large amount of nightlife, but don't hesitate to frequent museums and cultural centers, and
Hmm.
vendors of fruit, if you want to. sample some non-GMO products. If you want to take advantage of any of the local delicacies, if you're a foodie, organize a trip amongst your friends. You can't do it for as a tourist, thanks to
Right.
um, the policies in place. But I know for certain that Code Pink encourages people to either join a May Day brigade or sometime for Black August. I know one delegation member that's organizing a Black August delegation for African Americans to see the island up close. Um, and there's like definitely FAQ pages for people who either want to go on their own or to deliver aid
Mhm.
or organize their own delegations to support the people in other ways. So I think those are just some examples of
Yeah.
how people can contribute to the humanitarian effort, but then also because tourism was one of the lifelines of support that in Havana, at least, the Cuban people had.
Mhm.
If you can find a way, like for either cultural or research purposes, to
Mhm.
travel on your own, and if you have, more importantly, the finances to do so, it's
Yeah.
much encouraged.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it kind of funny that like we're we're forcing people essentially to have more of a narrow reason to go to Cuba so that they can't they can't just go like they would go to France or England or a European nation. But at the same time, in doing that, you're almost forcing people to be more political.
Right.
You're almost forcing people to learn more about all the bullshit that the country's been through and that the US has done, and like join all these initiatives that are going to naturally radicalize quote unquote people. So it's really funny to me that capitalism doesn't know what the fuck to do with itself. It's like, on the one hand, all right, you can't, if you go to Cuba, we're going to make it difficult for you. Got to do all these things. We don't want it to be just like a fun time for you, just like any other country. But by doing that, you're making motherfuckers dislike the US more because they're learning that a lot of the things we've learned about Cuba is propaganda. So you might as well just let people go on their own and help the economy. Because might as in fact, if you did that, there would be less people would be less drawn to more of, not that I'm upset people are learning about these things, but I'm saying it's like, even from a business standpoint or a standpoint of like having the American public not uh, join as many of these delegations and learning about deconstructing imperialist propaganda, it doesn't make sense because more freedom to travel to Cuba would actually give let people less of a reason to do those things, and it would just become literally about champagne and having fun, and then you could actually support the Cuban economy like you would anywhere
Right.
else you go when you're a tourist. I just find it an interesting kind of, it's almost like
Yeah.
capitalism trying to figure out which is worse.
Well, the capitalists kind of wanted to make with this inhumane blockade, blockade. The capitalists, you
Yeah,
know why? It's
yeah.
because I thought of the black market. That's why.
The
Uh,
Black August. I thought,
no,
okay.
the black market, but
Yeah.
which is a direct
Oh, yeah,
result
yeah,
of
yeah.
the trade embargo. But
The
yeah,
black market. Exactly. Yes, yes.
the capitalists don't know what to do. I think because they wanted to turn this inhumane blockade into another Gaza on their doorstep, since they're being
God
humiliated
forbid.
by Iran, basically. And
Mhm.
initiatives such as these are like it's I'm sure it's like infuriating to Marco Rubio anyway, that we're taking control of the narrative, we're retaking control of the narrative, and we're showing not
Mhm.
only how inhumane these policies are, but also how initiatives such as Cuban doctors developing the this new Alzheimer's drug or treatment under extraordinary duress, and why, as U.S. citizens, can't we have the same thing or even universal health care over here? Because we can't apparently we have to prioritize the military and we can't have daycare or
Mhm.
even healthcare. So we're taking back control of the narrative and showing people that by traveling to the island now, even with the help from the Russian tanker, how another world is possible and worth agitating for and fighting for, you know, over here or in other places that kind of feel like the belly of the beast.
Hmm.
Shout out
Well,
to Belly of the Beast.
well, thank you so much for your time here and what you did over there. And just want to close with something you might have coming up. You are working on a short documentary, right? About your time there, or assisting on one.
I am working on one. I have to. I'm going to start looking at all of the footage today and hopefully be finished with a rough cut this weekend so I can submit to some notable festivals and also maybe do some community screenings. And then from that, we'll see if it leads to distribution or other ways to support um, other ways to support Cuba.
Well, all right. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And of course, more conversations with you in the future. And yes, thank you again for really putting your actions with your words. We need as much of that as we can. And I'm sure the Cuban people really, really saw the love and support that you brought. So thank you. And thank you for anyone who hopefully eventually will listen to us. All right. Take
Hasta
care,
siempre.
Twitch, YouTube. Sí, hasta siempre.
Or as the people over there say, "Patria o muerte venceremos." You know,
Okay.